Alabama, we have a question from Twitter. Danish has a question for us.
What is the difference between minimalism and essentialism?
I hate to get bogged down in definition. So Ryan and I talk about what minimalism is. Minimalism is the thing that gets us past the things so we can make room for life's most important things, which actually aren't things at all. Now, you could call that a definition, but let's get to the essence behind each of these. In fact, essence, essential, essentialism.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, you can use these words interchangeably. And so I don't know what you mean by essentialism versus minimalism. But when I think of essentialism, I think it's often applied in business context. That's one way to think about it. Or when we talk about what is essential in our lives. So in the Minimalist Rulebook, which you can download for free, Danish, theminimalists.com/rulebook, there's 16 rules for living with less in there. And one of those rules, well, actually several of the rules in the book, I think will be helpful for you. But we talk about the no junk rule in particular. And in that rule, we talk about what is essential. Everything you own can fit in one of three piles. It is either essential. So the essentialist would have only that which is essential in our lives, right? And one way to think about that is an ascetic might be an essentialist, right? Now, a minimalist, however, has something that's in the second category. We own things that add value to our lives. They're non-essential items, meaning I could live without my coffee table.
Yeah.
But it adds value to my life. Why would I deprive myself of that? Now, there could be a good reason to deprive myself of it, at least temporarily, to ask, does it actually add value to my life? And temporary deprivation leads me to a place of, oh, you know what? The thing that I thought added value, the thing that I thought might be essential, isn't essential at all. I remember Ryan used to work with clients and he would help them through their budgets and he would have them list these, what is essential, what's non-essential but value adding. And then this third category is what is junk.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we conflate the non-essential value-adding things and the junk. It's the reason the average American household has 300,000 items in it, because we think everything is essential. Well, of course, if everything is essential, then nothing is essential. In fact, I would argue that most of us have very similar essentials. We all need food, shelter, clothing, education, vocation, transportation. But even those things manifest differently. Transportation for Professor Sean over here is taking the bus to the studio, or it could be walking somewhere, or it could be Ryan's Toyota Corolla, or whatever it is, right? Transportation looks different. Clothing looks different. If I gave Ryan all my clothes and I had all his clothes, all of a sudden we wouldn't have what was appropriate for us. And so keeping that in mind, what is essential to me may not add any value to your life whatsoever, or it could just be a non-essential. And so it's a highly perspectival question. What is essential for you? And then more important, what adds value to my life? And then if it doesn't actually add value to my life, then it's junk. And if it's junk, well, then I let it go.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is minimalism maybe starts with essential, but it doesn't end with the essential. And that's actually really important, I think, for people to understand with minimalism, is that this is beyond just the essential stuff.
You know, I think one of the things I get out of what you're saying is that distinction between biologically essential and psychologically optimal, right? Just because something isn't biologically essential doesn't mean it's not psychologically optimal. Music might not be biologically essential, but it makes me a better person. Art might not be biologically essential. So many of the things that amplify the quality of our lives are things that we could technically live without, but it isn't about living according to technicalities, right? It's about living meaningfully and as fully as possible. Another thing I'll say about the definition piece is it's sort of like the word optimism for me. If someone says, are you an optimist? My answer to that, it depends on how you understand the term. According to the way I define the word, if you give me the time to tell you what my definition of optimism is, I'm absolutely an optimist. But I've seen some people treat that word in a way that makes me say, oh yeah, if that's what you mean by optimism, I'm definitely not an optimist either, right? It's similar to the word Christian and a host of other things. Are you a Christian? Tell me what you mean by that word first before I commit to that. Because yeah, I am, but you got to give me a minute to tell you what I mean by that. But if you're just going to associate me with everyone you've ever met who wears that label, no, I'm a little more careful than that. The important thing is to live in accordance with your priorities and your principles, and then allow whatever definitions you use to be secondary to that. Are you an essentialist? Are you a minimalist? Most important thing is, are you living the way you want to live?
Yeah. The question is, not only do you survive, but how do you thrive? And that's really, again, what minimalism, I think Josh and I really, try and kind of help people understand is like, you could survive without music. You could survive without other people in your life. You can survive in a cabin in the middle of nowhere by yourself, but you certainly aren't going to thrive. In fact, to thrive, to be at peak health, you almost have to have some things in your life. I mean, I don't know why, but I've seen like a couple studies over the last month about cabin fever and how legitimately, like, it's bad for mental health to just be by yourself for a certain amount of time.
And there are certain people who can transcend that, but we have evolved. So evolutionarily, there is a requirement to have people in your life. But even for each person, it's going to be different. All three people at this table, and Mallory, who's disembodied but somewhere in the room, this ethereal
voice floating around the room.
The immaterial essence that hovers above.
I'm an extreme introvert. And so I don't spend a lot of time with other people, but I do need those interactions with other people. In fact, I thrive with ambient people. I will often work at a coffee shop and I don't interact with the people, but there's always the potential for interaction. And there is even casual interaction from time to time, or someone will walk up and they'll notice me. And where we moved recently, this is the private podcast, so I can say, I was up in Ojai yesterday. I was just working at a coffee shop and this guy walks in, and it's the opposite of what TK was saying a moment ago, because he's like, oh, do you live up here? We just came up here from LA to hang out for the weekend. And I'm like, yeah, we love it. He goes, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And he's like, it's very simple here. And so it's all about our interpretation of a thing. Some people are like, how could you move to California? You can't be a minimalist and go to California. Other people are like, you have to move to California to be a minimalist. And it's like, well, no, neither of those things are true. The question is, what is appropriate for you?
Oh man, I tell you, some of the horror stories I have around places I've lived and products I've purchased have proven to me that the willingness to pay a little more can go a long way in simplifying your life. There's no use in buying the cheap product or living in the cheap place just for the sake of being cheap if it creates a part-time job of having to look after it, follow up on it, get help, fix it when it breaks down, and maintain it over and over again. There is something to be said about paying the price for peace of mind.
Did you enjoy this standalone Patreon highlight? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalists private podcast available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.